Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 19 team selection. We're jumping into a game week that's obviously midweek football and very hard to see whether we'll actually get information before the deadline. So I'm recording this video right now, after Chris Richards is not in the lineup for that sort of Tottenham game, and unlikely, I think, to be there for the next game as well versus Fulham. So that sort of being context allowed me to record this video. Unfortunately, I'll have to go to bed soon, just with timing and things like that. But I got the information that I needed from the Palace game. I think I might end up with the red arrow potentially, just depending on whether Guehi can do well, or conversely, if Tottenham do well, probably just a bit of a grey arrow here, moving from around maybe 9k to 10k, or 9k to 9k, maybe even a green. But that would really require Tottenham to do well, which hopefully they do, just for the sake of that emotional feeling of getting a green arrow. But in reality, this week actually went reasonably well for me in Game Week 18. Just a quick recap, we actually got 48 points. Lefay was pretty disappointing. I did watch Sunderland versus Leeds, wasn't really impressed with that game. Didn't really get my, I guess, benching type decisions right. Like I played Lefay over Anderson. That would have been nice if I had the other sort of switch around. Ekitike versus Haaland captain, that did go well for me, so that's plus 3 points there. But it does feel sad, I guess, in situations where Haaland this season has kind of penalized me a little bit harder for doing the alternative captain. It does hurt that I wasn't able to get too much more out of Ekitike, and I thought he was brilliant still versus Wolves. But as a team, Liverpool, I clearly have concerns over. And sure, that was a great Wirtz performance in terms of, yes, he scored a goal. But I think that's like, I still have a lot of doubts over the team and some of the other individual players outside of Ekitike, who's pretty much been, one of Liverpool's only bright sparks this season. As far as the rest of my team, I was happy to bring in Cunha anyways, just for the long term. I think he'll be my captain for this week. Saka, it's nice to see him outscoring Rice sometimes. So doesn't happen often, but that's kind of why we pay a little bit more money. Now on the flip side, I've actually gone cheaper on defense. So Keane, doing so well, getting a pretty jammy return is nice. But then I think a lot of people did own Dubravka, Tarkovsky as well. So it's not like that was the type of haul that was completely exceptional to sort of my team and sort of my structure. Otherwise, I think that was pretty much how the game week went. Not the best in terms of losing the double Arsenal clean sheet, not the best in terms of City losing their clean sheet, but I think very, very much thoroughly deserved clean sheet losses, especially for City. In the game where, as I've mentioned within my transfer plans video, not sure why they were actually allowed to play with 11 men at some point in time in that game, and yeah, they've had a lot of lucky clean sheets as well, which I can totally acknowledge myself. So as we head into this week, I think the problem points will be just what happens to Semenyo, especially with the impending transfer. I think based on the BBC reporting that I've read, that he's most likely to play versus Chelsea, and that could be his final game for Bournemouth. Even though Bournemouth would love for him to play versus Arsenal at home. In other cases, I think Richards missing out the Tottenham game was expected, but so hard to see how, with a 2 to 3 day turnaround, that he's going to be ready and available for Fulham at home. Whilst I think I'll continue to do what most managers will do who are keeping him, in that I will just simply have Richards, in the starting squad and call upon an auto sub. That's not the best of news because these were great games that we wanted Richards for, and that's kind of changed how I've set up my team, anyways. Otherwise, that's kind of the main context. I think those are the two problem points in my team. I don't have much ability to really address the problem points other than I've got a lot of flexibility from an in the bank perspective, and I've got unfortunately one free transfer, right? So a little bit of flexibility in terms of cash, much less flexibility in terms of positional kind of changes. And I do think that this is a good week to buy into a lot of midfielders that I would move away from Semenyo into. So Gordon and Sobo are the two midfielders at the top of my mind. And I think even if you kind of have a look at some of the suggested transfers you could actually possibly get from Fantasy Football Hub, we went through and had a look at that in terms of the transfer plans as well. But if you're intrigued in getting, for example, suggested transfers for your own team, feel free to have a look at the link in the description below. But yeah, I think the AI will clearly just back the idea of simply going against, let's say, Chelsea and Arsenal for someone like Semenyo, who's unlikely to play the fixtures anyways, if you kind of think about games beyond Arsenal or just think about Arsenal. And this is such a good jumping on point to Newcastle players, potentially players like Sobo as well, or even a Gakpo. But whatever fits really for an FPL midfield at this moment in time in the absence of Bruno. But that's kind of my review in terms of Game Week 18. In terms of Game Week 19, we'd love to jump into sort of the projections for the week. I think the projections are interesting in the sense that if I was to free hit this week, I think I'd actually find it quite difficult to sort of make the right decisions. From a goals perspective, obviously, I think you'd expect Liverpool versus Leeds to be quite high scoring again. So you want to be invested into that game. And City are just really good. So you kind of like these teams, even Arsenal to an extent. But then actually United have a great fixture and Chelsea have a good fixture. And these are teams that we're probably less invested into. It's just one of those weeks where everyone kind of has a good or equivalent ish game. So you're backing the attacks that you want. So from a free hit perspective, I was kind of thinking about this with a friend of mine who's on a free hit. But it's just very hard. I think you can just pick almost the big hitters from all the teams, and that could be the best potential free hit. But it kind of takes away from that ceiling of the free hit because everything feels so mixed. From a clean sheet perspective, and I haven't even mentioned Newcastle, to be honest, who obviously are against Burnley and are going to have a great game on paper. But yeah, from a clean sheets perspective, I would still say that actually I would focus my efforts around Arsenal and City first before then looking at Newcastle. I would even go for, let's say, United defenders first over some of the Newcastle defenders. I know Burnley is an amazing game, but I think Wolves at home is even more exceptional in the context of these United defenders actually have a lot of attacking appeal and upside. So with City, I think one thing you can always approach a type of game week like this with is you can go for the attackers. Arsenal, I think they're always just better on defense. So it does feel like double defense in most weeks would win out in my estimation. A game like Brighton is a good reflection of in game weeks where you do feel like that's the case. You can still lose out very heavily, right? You can lose to that one chance that Brighton score, and suddenly Rice and Saka, and maybe the double up of the two wins out quite heavily. And yeah, that's kind of my main takeaway there. I really do think Liverpool have slipped so much as a team that I'm not someone that I would probably in previous game weeks have been telling people to invest into Liverpool defense quite heavily. But after Wolves at home is gone, Leeds at home, sure, is there, and Burnley at home is the banker, I suppose, in a few weeks' time. But you still have that Arsenal game in the distance. And it's one of those cases where if you've invested into Liverpool, I think that's fine, like Ekitike as well. You might just want to think about, what is the exit plan there? Or is it actually because Burnley at home is so valuable that you kind of almost accept that you're going to have a little bit of a worse team compared to the rest of the field? And then actually you then have the advantage of Burnley at home. So that's something that I've been thinking about a little bit myself in terms of if I'm to invest more into Liverpool now, and I've already mentioned Szoboszlai, I think the advantage is basically saying, okay, I can probably take a really bad game week 21 so that I can accept a good game week 22. And maybe I'd still feel comfortable, generally speaking, keeping some Liverpool players after that window. So it's one of those things in FPL where I think the alternative is going for these Newcastle players, where from a more long term perspective, you have players like Gordon who kind of have flat games, like not the highs and the lows that Liverpool do in the short term. But maybe they could make more sense if you just think I don't really want to have a bad team on such and such game week, and Newcastle just have an extremely clean run of fixtures, and I think that's kind of evident right now with the fixtures that we have at hand, starting from game week 19 for Newcastle. But yeah, I almost think why not bank in the upside with Liverpool, hope for the best once again. Not that it really worked out in game week 18. I think if you kind of look at the expected goal projections for Liverpool on models that I've seen on market odds, they just haven't been impressive. So this is a transfer that I think I'll be holding on towards the end. I don't know necessarily if I love Gordon so much as a transfer that I think I would need to rush into him, especially since I still think I have some questions over his minutes, and they could be wrong, right? But I think with one free transfer, I almost think I need to make the right transfer. So it could also be a case of I can delay my transfer for this week because in the worst case scenario, I have someone like Semenyo. So that's kind of how I feel about attacking the fixtures in Game Week 19. It is a bit of a strange week. Even with Brighton, I guess you can say that you're jumping back into two really good games here in 19 and 20, specifically 20 with Burnley at home. But it is tricky because they don't look like a super competent team. Um, and yet you can still see a team like Brentford, for example, they're kind of playing extremely good football. Same with Leeds, and I think a lot of their picks have gone under the radar. But this is probably a good time to sort of reinvest into these teams. So lots of different routes in FPL. I think at this stage of the season, not everyone looks exciting though, and I think it's kind of a case where we're almost putting our hands in a basket and just saying these are roughly picks that I think could do well. No one really stands out to me. No one I really love long term, but I kind of have to just hope for the best. And Lafay last week as a transfer is a good reflection of that. And, watching Sunderland versus Leeds, I almost felt what a mistake it was to actually go Lafay over Stack, just watching Stack, do his work as a quiet def corner and someone who, has set piece share. And, of course, part of the reason why we've gone for Lafay is for things that didn't culminate within the game. I guess Sunderland had a small sliver of a chance of getting a penalty, but it didn't culminate. So maybe I'm overreacting too much. I think Lafay over the course of the season has probably had slightly better DEFCON numbers anyways than Stack. But then if he plays in more advanced positions at times, it doesn't really seem like he's actually going to be involved in DEFCON. So we'll continue to monitor that thread going forwards. But it is almost a phase in FPL where I think I don't love my team, but we're just going to have to hope to get lucky. And that's kind of how I feel about this game week as well. And all the possible transfers and routes that I can actually take, seeing as I'm about to go into Szoboszlai. So since I've already revealed what my transfer is basically going to be, we're going to go Raya and Hincapié in defense. I currently have Richards versus Fulham at home starting alongside O'Reilly. Sure, this might not be the players that I'm expecting to play. I also have Keane versus Nottingham Forest at this moment in time, just because I think Crystal Palace away is still a team that I still immensely respect. So Lafay is kind of on the bench for me, but behind Anderson in the bench order. Does it feel good, sort of mirror matching two defenses up against each other? Not really. So maybe there's an argument for me to play Lafay, but this is still maybe a worse instance where I would be pitting an attacker versus a defender in O'Reilly. So I don't really like that either. Hence why I've got Anderson first bench, Lafay second bench, and Richards and Keane at this moment in time starting. In the midfield, I've actually gone with Foden, Saka, and Cunha. And Cunha, we'll talk about captaincy in a moment, but Szoboszlai will join this team. As per my transfer plans, I think the reason why I value going Semenyo to Szoboszlai and actually saving more money in the bank is I think, well, first of all, I'm probably going to spend money eventually in just moving Hincapié to Gabriel, which will just mean that in the future, I'll need to find more ways of getting cash out of my team. On top of that, I do want a route towards Palmer through that money, and spending less money in the midfield in another midfield position is probably more ideal than spending more money on let's say, the replacement of Semenyo, going for Gordon, who is, I think, 0.8 million more, and I guess kind of being left with the inability of, I don't know, going towards Palmer in a clean structure that probably keeps Saka, which I think is a differential. With the amount of team value that I have, I think Saka is actually is becoming actually, or looks like a really consistent own for me. Now, Ekitike is actually someone who's kind of taking a huge amount of money in my team, and potentially he's the cash cow in the future that can still allow me to go into Palmer, but that also means that I probably would plan to upgrade Lafay in the distance, and I need that money. So I think, all things being said, it's nice to sort of have cheapened down a bit recently, but there will be moves that I make in the future that require cash, and hence why I think if it was sort of just between Sobo and Gordon and Rogers being more of a game week 20 type move, I think I just prefer just going Sobo now, taking leads at home, as a vantage point, and then just saying I can reassess in a few game weeks time, especially since I need to make midfield moves anyways, right? Like when Bruno's back in the game, he's a transfer but maybe not necessarily so quickly because he will have those City and Arsenal games. As far as, let's say, Palmer, though, his fixtures get better a lot sooner, and he's already fit and ready to play. Not necessarily 90 minutes of football, but at least 75 minutes of football in a pretty fixture dense week. So I think having plans towards Palmer is sort of what the idea is here. And Sobo, generally speaking, supports that. So we're going to make the Sobo move. In the front line, we'll have Ekitike and Haaland. I don't think Slot mentioned anything, negative about Ekitike from a transfer point. So he kind of did the Saka limp off the pitch. I don't think that's a huge issue. He should be fit for Leeds at home, and I'm looking forward to that game as well, seeing as he did so well in the reverse fixture. This is a tough match on paper for Haaland, Sunderland away. We just saw Leeds do extremely good, though, versus Sunderland away, and I wasn't particularly impressed, to be honest, by Sunderland's defending the second half, or just generally, I mean, how they kind of showed up in that half anyways. But yeah, I mean, the biggest question this week for captaincy is going to be Cunha versus Haaland. Going back to, let's say, some of those odds numbers, City and United actually have very similar odds numbers, I think, this week. And I think the market odds for United will definitely be higher compared to, let's say, what the 11-5 numbers are for United. So that's kind of something that makes me think, okay, if the team goal numbers are very close, this is actually a pretty good opportunity for me to simply just go for, excuse me, a Cunha captaincy. And Cunha is the pick that I actually like the most from that perspective. So I think Wolves at home is for the taking. There's so many injuries right now to let's say other players within the game, and Mount maybe being out for this game could change my mind in terms of captaincy. So if I think about how bad United could really be, that is something that I'm not so interested in. I guess a mountless team, a team that just generally doesn't have much depth within the attacking positions as it is. So maybe we'll pivot back into Haaland captaincy, but I'm still pretty much enamored by Cunha. That could also be, I guess, like motivated by a false understanding of, let's say, whether Cunha is actually on penalties or not. I think he is, just because he's the only real one with like penalty pedigree outside of Sesko, who doesn't feel like he's very confident at this moment in time, and would sort of step up to ask to take penalties. But that could be conjecture on my part, right? Sesko is actually someone who historically is, I think, 11-0 on penalties. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Cunha is going to be on penalties. So if I take that out of the equation, maybe it's actually a case to just simply go for a Haaland captaincy. But I do like Cunha here. I like the midfield punt. I've taken punts against Haaland many, many times now too. So I feel quite comfortable doing this. And we're going to have Cunha captain as a result and Haaland vice captaincy. From an effective ownership standpoint, I mean, you guys know that I kind of like taking risks. I did Ekitike captain solely on the basis that I thought they were kind of equivalent captaincies this week in Gameweek 18, and I thought it would make a lot more sense for me to actually punt with Ekitike, because that's generally my FPL playstyle. When it comes to, let's say, Cunha versus Haaland, I almost think Cunha's ahead, but even if you were to make the argument that, let's say, Cunha's not on penalties and things like that, and suddenly the fixtures are a lot closer, with that in mind, then I'd probably still take the punt, and that's kind of what I like about this captaincy here. Does it feel a bit awful at times watching Haaland play against myself? Absolutely. But it is sort of my personal playstyle preference. And it also makes watching Cunha or, let's say, an Ekitike play a little bit more rewarding. So, and fun to go against most of the field, at least, with 80 to 100% of like an effective ownership difference with certain players. So that's going to be my Game Week 19 team selection. Let me know what your thoughts are in terms of my alternative transfers. I mean, something I thought about is, say if I'm going to make multiple free transfers anyways to get towards Palmer, I guess I could actually just do Lefay back into Sobo, but that would still leave me with a Semenyo-sized hole next game week. Although that Semenyo-sized hole could just simply be covered up by Morgan Rogers, who's about to enter into a pretty decent fixture run. Gordon is still there on the table for next week. Otherwise, a defender move, I suppose I could do it in the same context as if I kind of like the idea of going, let's say, Lefay out into Sobo. I suppose I can also just entertain, if Richards is out, Richards to Dorgu, and then, I don't know, become a cash cow once, or just be a bank for a few weeks, somehow own 2.x million in the bank, and then just wait for a better move to come along. But it's kind of hard to see that being the case. But that could not that itself could just kind of give me a move like Acuna towards a Palmer. But um, right now, I'm kind of set on the Zoba move. I just think it's elegant in the sense that it gets rid of the Semenyo issue, who will be a future problem. And I don't think I need too many defensive like fixes on my team, unless of course, as I said, if Richards is out for a bit longer, then maybe we can kind of consider being a bit more creative with the free transfers. With Lafay, he was pretty poor versus Leeds, but I'm not going to overreact too much because I think on one hand, a lot of people sort of overreacted to the performance and the quality on display versus Brighton and him getting around 1 XGI within that match. He then turns up to a next match versus a very tough opponent now. I think Leeds are sort of maybe one of the most informed teams in the league, like especially from an underlying stats perspective. Like the numbers that they've been putting up have been really impressive. I'm not surprised that Leeds put up a really good performance. Like I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, we felt exactly the same about Brentford, right? So concerned about how Brentford played versus Leeds, when actually in hindsight, I think Leeds are just good. And we saw Brentford, for example, go back to pretty good attacking form. I guess completely smashing apart Bournemouth, this week. So, is there a need to overreact to someone like Lafay? Probably not. Maybe I'm just a salty owner right now, or an upset owner, and you know, those are the kind of thoughts ruminating in my head. It is a tricky FPL week, I think, especially because there's so many directions you can go. So many players and teams have decent fixtures, and I think we're all about to head into some very, very different directions, which I like. But nothing is clear. And I'm hoping for the best regardless. But see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.